one of the most used tools in life science is the microscope. And so the microscope is an instrument that makes magnified images of very small objects so they can be visible to the human eye. So much of life science deals with microscopic organisms, and without the microscope, many science discoveries wouldn't have been possible. So, like cells. Cells, we would have never known about cells if the microscope hadn't been invented. Cells are the building blocks of living things, and the discovery of cells led to the cell theory. We also wouldn't know anything about bacteria, and bacteria are the most numerous living things on the planet. So there are more bacteria than people on the earth. There's more bacteria than insects on the earth. And so bacteria have a bad rap because they're known to cause many diseases, but there are also good bacteria. So the invention of the microscope happened more than 4 centuries ago. In the late 1500s, 2 Dutch eyeglass makers, Zacharias Janssen and his dad Hans, built the very first microscope. And that microscope led to many improvements upon it. One of them was in the mid-1600s by an English scientist named Robert Hooke. He was the first to observe living things with a microscope, and he published the first book, which he called Micrographia, and it included drawings of microscopic organisms and other objects. One of the most important discoveries came when he viewed thin slices of cork underneath a microscope. So, not a lot of people know that cork actually comes from trees. And so what he was actually looking at when he looked at the cork were many tiny, tiny compartments that he called cells. And so that's what this diagram over here is showing you, is a picture of cork from underneath a microscope. And each of these little areas would be one of the cells that Robert Hooke was trying to describe. In the late 1600s, Van Leeuwenhoek sees what he called animalcules, like molecules, but with animals. He was a Dutch lens maker and a scientist, and he actually started making stronger microscopes. He could magnify objects as much as 270 times, and he was the first to see and describe bacteria. And he looked at bacteria found on the plaque of his teeth. So when you feel your teeth and they kind of feel kind of fuzzy, that's bacteria colonies starting to grow on your teeth. Not only did he see bacteria, but he looked at yeast cells. He looked at human sperm cells. He looked at the microscopic life in a drop of pond water. And that's where the term animalcules came from, was when he saw all the things scuttling around in that drop of pond water. And he also looked at blood cells. So this picture right here shows you some of Van Leeuwenhoek's drawings and depictions of the animalcules. Modern microscopes are a little bit better than the guys back in the day were using. The early microscopes used lens to refract or bend light, and this helped to create magnified images. So one of the most common types of microscopes still used today is a light microscope, and this is a microscope that uses light and lenses to create magnified objects. So the light shines up through here, and it goes up through this little circular piece called the diaphragm, and up to this clear piece, which is where we set the specimen, and we use our eyes up here on the eyepiece, and we can look through it and see things that get magnified. The most powerful light microscope can magnify objects up to 2,000 times their actual size. So that's pretty good. But as time has advanced, we've needed to see smaller and smaller objects. And so how do we see things that are smaller than cells? Well, the solution was we needed a different microscope. We needed a better microscope. We needed a stronger microscope. So scientists invented an electron microscope. And an electron microscope passes beams of electrons through or across an object. And so this creates very clear images, and it can magnify up to 2 million times the normal size of an object. So without the microscope, life science would have been stalled. And instead of that happening, life science has been able to advance because microscopes have gotten better and better.